Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today we're going to be taking a look at one of the first Fusion Strike deck lists we're going to be looking at on the channel. Kicking things off today with Inteleon VMAX. Just before we get into it though, make sure you check out the Poketown store where you can use code Omnipoke for an extra 5% off your order. So Inteleon VMAX is, this is the second time we've seen Inteleon VMAX, but this one is a Rapid Strike Pokemon. And it looks to be a really good Cheryl user. Cheryl is a card that's been used in various decks as sort of a one-off here and there. And then a couple of very minor instances where it's been more than just a one-off. This deck, as you'll see when we get to the list, plays the full 4 count of Cheryl, which is pretty exciting. It looks to be a really strong and tanky archetype with a lot of flexibility, a lot of space. So yeah, there's a lot to like about this archetype. It does have kind of low damage output, but being able to heal every single turn is really good. It reminds me of some of the current Jolteon decks. And also you have supplementary damage through Inteleon pings here and there as well to be able to get you into good numbers. So yeah. Onto the Pokemon. We have a 4-3 line of the new Inteleon VMAX. The basic is pretty simple, or the V is pretty simple. It's a Rapid Strike, 2 prize, 200 HP water Pokemon. That has Surf for 40, which actually is somewhat relevant because 40 damage plus 2 Gmax Whirlpools takes you up to 320, which is kind of a really sweet spot right now. So don't sleep on Surf, it can be pretty important. And then Aqua Bullet for 120 3 energy, and it does 20 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Again, not too relevant. The damage can be found in other ways, and because this specific list is actually only running the 4 Rapid Strike energy, it means that it's actually a bit more costly than just the 3 energy, so we're not going to use Aqua Bullet too much. Onto the Inteleon VMAX, we're running 3 of these with the double shooter ability, not too relevant in this build, but regardless, once during your turn you may discard a water from your hand. If you do, put 2 damage counters on 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon, so important to know that it is benched Pokemon, just because that can affect your decision making with the quick shooting Inteleon, but again it can really help with numbers. In this particular build I'm showing off today, we're not running any waters, but as you'll see when we get there, there are options, or it is sort of another way to build the deck, so you can build around that double shooter, which is cool. But Gmax Whirlpool is where it's at, 70 damage for 2 energy. Obviously this could be powered by a Rapid Strike energy, and you may return an energy attached to this Pokemon to your hand. If you do, this attack does 70 more damage. So there you go. Basically, we attach a Rapid Strike, put it back into hand, and do 140. We take a hit. We can then Cheryl it all off. We have no energy, so we're not seeing any of the downsides of Cheryl. We're getting all of the upsides because we're able to heal it all off. Then reattach that special energy and carry on again. So yeah, really strong sort of synergy between these 2 cards. We've then got a 2-2 Octillery line. Octillery has the Rapid Strike search, obviously that lets you search for a Rapid Strike card once per turn. In general, it searches for pretty much the majority of the Pokemon in the deck, but also, very importantly, it searches for Rapid Strike every turn. One of the awkward things about this deck is obviously you put the Rapid Strike back into hand, your opponent can Marnie it out of the hand into the bottom of the deck, and since you're only playing 4, it can sometimes be quite difficult to find these, so having Octillery on the board guarantees us energy every turn that we need it. And then we've got a full 4-4-2-2 line of the Inteleon. So 4 Sobble and 4 Drizzile, pretty standard. 2 quick shooting Inteleon, again pretty standard, letting you adjust your numbers as and where needed. And then often this is only a 1 count, the Shady Dealings Inteleon, but in this case we're playing it as a 2 count. Essentially because we need to be able to tutor out Cheryl basically every single turn. Cheryl is pretty much the backbone of the deck. So having an extra Shady Dealing is really important. Also helps for gathering these ball search cards, which help you get the Octillery and stuff online to be able to get into the energy as well. So yeah, very important to play this. We feel at least very important to play the second Shady Dealings, just to primarily have more access to Cheryl in the mid game. Onto the items, we have 4 Quick Ball, 4 Evolution Incense, and 4 Level Ball, which is pretty standard in a lot of these Inteleon decks. We're also rocking the 2 Great Ball as well. Essentially, these are probably the most flexible slots, and when we get onto the techs, these would be the cards that I would be looking to cut if I wanted to maybe make some changes. But the 2 Great Ball, again, just kind of help find more Pokemon in the game, in the mid-game and early game. Basically, we want to have as much access to our Inteleon line as possible, because that's going to help us get into other things like Octillery and then Energy, or more Drizziles and Shady-dealing Inteleons to get into Cheryl and stuff. So yeah, the Great Balls are pretty nice. They're not the strongest of cards. Like I say, they're probably the 2 weakest cards in the deck. So they would be my flex slots, but we've just got 2 Great Balls in hint for now, just for that added consistency. We've then got a couple of Scoop Up Nets. Again, being able to reuse all of the Shady Dealings abilities is very, very important. Also, there can be times where, because we're a VMAX deck, we want to try and make our opponent take 8 prizes. There could be times where we can scoop up net the couple of 1 prizes that we've used after they've taken some prizes. So essentially all that we have left on the board is an Inteleon VMAX, which they have to deal with, which is obviously a lot more difficult to deal with than like a Sobble, something like a Sobble. We then have one Escape Rope. Escape Rope is really nice for being able to move around and get into our other Inteleons if we can't find the Cheryls and stuff, but also just having access to being able to move in and out a bit like a Switch is nice. I like the Escape Rope slightly more than Switch just because it means that we can sort of deal with stuff our opponent's trying to set up. It's kind of like a pseudo boss because we're playing Cheryl so frequently. This works as some kind of gusting as well. Admittedly, it works a bit better in the build with the water energy because it means that we can ping specific targets, well, move specific targets to the bench and then be able to ping them for knockouts with the Gmax, well, the VMAX's ability. But I still really like the rope in here. And then also one Big Charm. Big Charm really helps in the Fusion Strike matchups. Basically, they can't reach 350 ever with the Genesect. So that can be one big downside of this kind of deck. Obviously, if you're trying to heal every turn, any deck that can one-shot you can be a bit of an issue. So Big Charm can help us keep out of range of that, as well as just in general meaning we can potentially tank an extra hit before having to Cheryl, which is obviously also particularly important if we want to try and maximise the value out of these Cheryls, which can be often, like I say, life or death for the deck. On to the supporters, and as I've mentioned many times, Cheryl is the backbone. We're playing the full 4 count. We just want to have it in hand every turn, basically. Because of that, we're also running a slightly lower research count because we don't really want to bin them too often. Basically, the deck can tutor out any cards at once between Octillery and Inteleon, so there isn't much massive need for draw supporters once you've initially set up and got to the point where you want to be Cheryling every turn. So that's why we can look at this kind of support account instead. We've also got the 3 Marnies. We're playing 4 Path, so Marnie Path can be another really back-breaking part of this deck to be able to try and cripple opponents, especially if we're healing off damage as well. Eventually we can try and run them out of resources or put them into a position where Path is really detrimental to them. So yeah, that's a really, really nice, basically, support to use in our off turns where we're not using Cheryl. 2 Boss, just because it's Boss. Boss is still really, really important, being able to gust up specific targets. Primarily, actually, one of the big ones is the Latias from the Fusion Strike deck, because that can be another win condition for them. Basically, they just pretty much hardlock you trying to only use Latias. Obviously, we have a bit of movement here and there to be able to deal with other targets, but eventually we will run out of gusting potentially, so before that happens we want to try and boss his orders and get rid of the Latias. And then obviously 2 research, again, not too much prevalence on draw supporters in this list just because we tutor so much, but we do need some in the early game just to get into the game in the first place. And then, as I mentioned, 4 Path to the Peak. There's a couple of other stadiums that I'll chat about momentarily that we can play in addition to, or maybe as a 1, maybe cut a path for one of these, or you know, even like bumping up to 5 stadiums just to guarantee Path wins the Stadium War is another not terrible idea. But yeah, we're just locking in the 4 Path to Peak in this build. And then, as I mentioned, the 4 Rapid Strike Energy as well. So there's the full list if you want to take a quick screenshot. Onto some techs. Capture Energy is an interesting one. It's kind of similar to Great Ball, where it helps you get set up in the early turns. Unfortunately, it basically becomes useless in the late game because we need to be attaching the energy that we've just removed from our own Inteleon. So eventually Capture Energy just becomes a dead card, whereas these Great Balls aren't, which is why I slightly prefer Great Ball, because even if you don't see them in the early game, they are usable late game. But in a world where you can attach Capture Energy, you're probably winning already. But they can be a nice option just to get you started, and obviously they can be attached to Sobble a little bit more freely. You're a bit less happy when you have to attach a Rapid Strike to a Sobble, but being able to attach a capture to a Sobble to either retreat or keep calling to fill your board is never a bad thing. Tower of Waters is one of those other stadiums that I mentioned, maybe in place of the escape rope, or maybe in addition to the escape rope, as well as maybe cutting one of the path slots or something like that to be able to, again, gain some flexibility of the deck, being able to essentially move your Inteleon out of the way on turns that you can't Cheryl, to try and combo that with a Marnie or whatever to try and force a boss out of the opponent can be good. Power Pad is another one, again, being able to reuse Cheryls. 6 Cheryls in a game is really good. Even just more bosses, more Marnies, more researchers isn't a bad thing, so Power Pad would probably be my number one tech if I was making another addition to the deck. And then also, as I mentioned, there's the Water Energy kind of training court package that we can add in. You can either make a fully fledged deck out of that, or just sort of add it as a small package into this deck, cutting the Path of the Peaks and things like the Great Balls and stuff, and adding 3 or 4 Water Energy and some training courts to be able to also do some more supplementary damage. Personally, I feel like the more disruptive build with the Path of the Peaks is slightly better than the more aggressive build, but I don't think the aggressive build is particularly bad, and I would recommend you give it a go, because you can, in combination with a couple of quick shooting Inteleon, you can really put a lot of pressure on opponents' benches, and in worlds where we have Houndours and Sobbles everywhere, you can quite easily take prizes on those kinds of Pokemon in one turn fairly quickly. So yeah, really, really interesting alternative way of building the deck. Matchups wise, its matchups don't look amazing, but it's a very, very polarizing deck. It either wins very, very well, we feel, because people just can't deal with the onslaught of Cheryl plus 140 every turn, or it straight up loses because decks are either more aggressive, have weakness, or can one-shot through it. So yeah, Mew and Genesect, the 2 Fusion Strike decks, we would say are still slightly unfavored, even with the couple of techs we've added in. Basically, they have so much aggression and so much early turn pressure that eventually they can even sometimes take out their first 3 prizes through a 1 prizer plus an Inteleon, and then they only have to get through one of these VMAXs. Like I say, the Mew deck also has the Dyna Barrier sort of aspect of it, which we have to deal with, and if they're putting on enough pressure, where there's been games me and Joe have had where the Mew deck has been putting on so much pressure, sort of gusting the Sobbles and using Dyna Barrier on things like those, that you don't even have time to be able to gust their Dyna Barrier and get rid of the issue, that they can just sort of roll with it. So yeah, Dyna Barrier can be a bit of an issue. Similarly with Genesect, Genesect can eventually push into the one-shots because it has a bit more a bit more aggression in terms of max downer, as well as the power tablets in the deck, so they can bring your HP down to be able to then push into a one-shot with Technoblast. And then Jolteon is a bit of an awkward matchup. It's not the absolute worst. We've played it a little bit, and it's not like unwinnable or anything, but obviously them having weakness means that the pressure is on slightly more, but more importantly, they are very, very good at targeting your engine, your Sobbles, your Remoraids, even your Inteleons and Octilleries. They're very, very good at targeting those, and basically you need this engine, because we're playing a lack of draw supporters. We need this engine to be able to still find the pieces we need when we're not using a draw supporter and we're using Cheryl for the turn, which you'll have to in the Jolteon matchup because they're dealing 200 per turn for basically 1 energy. So yeah, it can be a bit of an awkward one. It's definitely winnable, but it's a lot more awkward than some of these other matchups. Everything else, though, seems pretty strong. A lot of these 2-shot decks, things like Dragapult, Leafeon, even Rapid Strike Inteleon are pretty good, just because naturally you do a little bit more damage than them, but you're playing a much higher Cheryl count than them, so essentially you will be able to reset enough of their turns to be able to basically mitigate their whole game plan. Obviously there's a couple of these decks that do, again, try to target down some of these bench Pokemon, but another key thing to note is Cheryl wipes off all the damage on things like on things like Drizziles and Inteleons as well, so as long as you're able to evolve basically every basic you put down against something like a Dragapult, you are eventually able to heal off all the damage that they do, so you're not even worried about them taking prizes on the bench stuff either, which is cool. So yeah, some closing thoughts. It has really polarizing matchups, like I say. Feels like it has a lot of very strong auto-win style matchups and a lot of auto-loss style matchups where you either win based on the card your opponent flips over, or you lose because they can't deal with the Cheryl stuff. Obviously, a more aggressive sniping build is something that I mentioned, but the disruption of Marnie Path still feels pretty backbone on the off turns, like I say, where you're not using Cheryl. It feels like the quick shooting Inteleon has enough supplementary damage to get by anyway, but it would be pretty interesting I wouldn't be surprised even to see a more aggressive Inteleon build do quite well, just because of the sheer amount of damage counters it gets to put on the board every turn. It's pretty insane. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed this first Fusion Strike deck analysis. Make sure you stick around in the next couple of days. We'll be having plenty more of these coming ahead of Fusion Strike's release. And yeah, other than that, thank you very much. I have been Jack from Omnipoke, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon.